To my notes on integers and absolute value. So today's objective is to identify and describe the absolute value for rational numbers. So the first thing we need to do is recall what an integer is. So an integer is a whole number that can be graphed on a number line. Integers less than 0 are negative, and integers greater than 0 are positive. Zero is neither negative nor positive, so we call that neutral. It's also called the origin, the point where you start. All whole numbers and their opposites are integers. For example, 7 and its opposite, negative 7, are both integers. So here are some real-life examples of integers, and we need to determine if they're negative or positive. So 50 degrees below 0. That would be negative. You owe your parents $10, so you don't actually have that money necessarily. You owe it to them, so that's a negative. And a deposit of $50. So you're adding money to your account, so that is a positive 50. Okay, moving right along. So what is absolute value? It's how far a number is from 0. So you can see on the number line, negative 6 is 6 spaces away from 0, and positive 6 is also 6 spaces away from 0. So the absolute value of 6 is 6, and the absolute value of negative 6 is also 6. So an integer and its opposite will have the same absolute value. And here's how you write absolute value right here. Kind of looks like football goalposts. And here's how you write negative 6. So absolute value is the distance from 0. Absolute value will always be positive because distance is always positive. Okay, moving right along. So here's some more examples. And then at the end or after each one, we'll explain why, but we're not going to write the explanation. So absolute value of negative 1/2 is 1/2 because it's 1/2 distance away from 0. Absolute value of 100 is 100 because it's 100 spaces from 0. And negative 12.5, absolute value is 12.5 because it's 12.5 or 12 and 5/10 spaces from 0. Okay, let me move on up here. This is practice integers and absolute value. So write an integer for each situation. So the first one, a gain of 5 yards, that is positive 5. 50 degrees below 0 is negative 50. A withdrawal of $60 is negative 60. A deposit of $75 is 75 because your account's going up. 2,152 feet above sea level, so that's positive. And a fish swims 15 feet below water, that is negative. You're below. Okay, find the absolute value. Remember, absolute value is the distance from 0. So absolute value of 11 is 11. Absolute value of negative 20 is 20. Absolute value of 13 is 13. So this one's just written backwards, but it's the same thing. Always look for the absolute value. And the answer should always be positive. Absolute value of negative 33 is 33. Absolute value of negative 21 is 21. And the absolute value of 15 is 15. And all of these are positive because that's how far it is away from 0, and distance is always positive. Okay, now we're going to compare some absolute values. So in order to compare these, we have to convert them to integers. So the absolute value of negative 12 is 12. And the absolute value of 10 is 10. So now how does 12 compare to 10? Hopefully you were thinking greater, so it points that way. Remember, your arrow, the end of your arrow always points to the smaller number. Absolute value of 15 is 15. Absolute value of negative 15 is also 15. So how do those compare? Hopefully you were thinking equal. And the last one, absolute value of 3 is 3. Absolute value of negative 7 is 7. So how does 3 compare to 7? Hopefully you said less than. Okay, so now we need to circle all the values that are true. So take a quick look at these and circle all of the ones that are true. Okay, now I'm looking at the absolute value and I'm looking for positive answers. So is this one a positive answer? No. Is this one a positive answer? Yes. Is this one a positive answer? No. And is this one a positive answer? No. So here we only have one correct answer. Remember, distance is always, oh, wait a second. Before I do that, I believe we've got to move up here. I believe you have two more here. Whoops. We need to look at two more before moving on. The absolute value of 2.6 is 2.6. It is positive. And then the absolute value of negative 4/5 is positive 4/5. So we need to circle those as well. Now remember, distance is positive. So absolute value is positive. Okay, now we can move on. And it says, if the absolute value of x equals 7, circle all the values that could represent x. Which means, if we put all these numbers in for x here, so took out the x and put the number, which ones would have an answer of 7? And remember, absolute value is the distance from 0. So which of these would be 7 away from 0? Hopefully you said positive 7 and negative 7. Remember, an integer and its opposite will have the same absolute value. Okay, now we have to determine the absolute value using a number line. So we want to know the absolute value of negative 9. So we're going to practice writing the absolute value of negative 9 equals what? So how many spaces away from 0 is negative 9? That's correct, 9. Okay, and the last one here. We want to know the absolute value of 4, so I'm going to practice writing the absolute value symbol. So absolute value of 4. So how far is that away from 0? Hopefully you said 4. Okay, moving right along. Now we are going to apply and draw absolute value for real life situations. So let's read the first one here. Sarah is hiking Hawksbill, the highest point of the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia. Its elevation is 4,049 feet above sea level, so I can underline that. That's going to be important. Represent this as an integer and give the absolute value for Hawksbill. So the first thing we're going to do is write the integer. And the integer is 4,049 above sea level, so that's positive. And now we're going to write the absolute value. So I'm going to use this symbol, 4,049. So there's a symbol for absolute value. And how far is that away from 0? 4,049. Okay, the next one, the lowest point known is Challenger Deep at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. It is located 35,797 feet below sea level. So let's write the integer again. So the integer is, we're looking at 35,797 feet below sea level, so it should be negative. And now let's write the absolute value. So let's use the symbol, 35,797. And how far is that away from 0? Whoops, I forgot the negative here. And hopefully you said 35,797. Okay, and the very last example here. During the Sunday night football game against the Atlanta Falcons, Michael Vick was sacked for a loss of 15 yards. Represent this as an integer and then give the absolute value. So we're going to write, once again, the integer. A loss of 15, so what do you think? Negative 15, excellent. And the absolute value, we're going to write the symbol and put negative 15 in the symbol. So how far is that away from 0? Hopefully you said 15. Okay, now we're going to practice graphing some absolute value on a number line. So the first one, it says, graph the integer, then represent the absolute value on the number line. So the absolute value of 5. So the way we would do this is we would mark a spot at 5. And since absolute value is the distance from 0, I'm going to mark a spot at 0. And I'm going to connect these. So it kind of looks like an absolute value symbol. And I want to know what the distance is from 0. So how far is 5 away from 0? It is 5. So this is how we represent it on a number line. And then we put the answer of 5 over here. Okay, the next one is absolute value of negative 4. So I'm going to mark negative 4. Absolute value is the distance from 0. So I'm going to stop at 0. How far is that away? That's correct, 4. So the absolute value of negative 4 is 4. And the last one, we're going to mark a spot at 7. We're going to mark a spot at 0. And we're going to connect those. So how far is 7 away from 0? Hopefully you said 7. So the absolute value of 7 is 7. Okay. So now we want to practice circling all the true statements. So take a few seconds to circle all the correct statements based on what we've learned of absolute value. Remember, it's the distance from 0. So this first one's absolute value of 8/10, negative 8/10, that is incorrect. Absolute value of 36 is 36, that is true. Absolute value of negative 52 is positive 52. And absolute value of negative 8.5 is not 0. So circle the values that could represent x if the absolute value of x is 25. So remember, if we place all these numbers in for x, which ones would have an answer of 25? And hopefully you said 25 and negative 25. Because remember, opposite integers will have the same absolute value, or opposite numbers, because it could be fractions as well, or decimals. Okay, so moving right along, we need to model word problems with absolute value. So it says the temperature is 30 degrees Fahrenheit in the morning and drops to negative 20 in the evening. What is the difference between these two temperatures? So I'm going to mark negative 20 here. And I'm going to put 0 about here, and I'm going to put 30 about here. So I want to know how far these are apart. Now, some of you were probably thinking 10 right off the bat, but if you look at the number line, that's a lot further than 10. So what I would do is mark these off from 0. So I connect negative 20 to 0, and how far is that away? 20. And then I connect 0 to 30. And how far is that away? 30. So if I count 20 and then 30 more, how much is that? Hopefully you said 50. So the answer is 50 degrees. And I'm going to go ahead and circle it so this stands out as my answer. Okay, now
Staff who just
what
arrived,
is?
so we just wanted to let you know that
Sorry
free
for the
breakfast is being
interruption.
offered for staff members as well in the cafeteria. If you would like to go anytime at quarter till, they are open. There's a cold side and a hot side. And if you don't know your PIN number for lunch, you just tell them your last name and then you'll know it next time. Thanks.
Okay, sorry for the interruption. And now we have, what is the difference in elevation between Mount McKinley and Death Valley? So the top of Mount McKinley is 20,320 feet. So I want to know how far is that from zero? And hopefully you were thinking 20,320. And the lowest point is negative 282. So that is 282 feet away. And so the top to the bottom, I have to put the two together. And so I'm going to add these together. So 0 plus 2 is 2. 2 plus 8 is 10. So put down the 0, carry the 1. 1 plus 3 plus 2 is 6. 0 plus nothing is 0. And 2 plus nothing is 2. So we have 20,602 feet. And I'm going to go ahead and circle my answer. So that concludes our notes on integers and absolute value. Have a great day.